This team chapter presentation is for Group 1. We will be discussing the ruling class and ideas, the history of the subaltern classes, concept of ideology, and cultural themes and ideological material. What are the ruling ideas? Well, according to Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, they are the expression of the dominant material relations, aka the ideas of the ruling class's dominance. This concept emerges from the idea of Hegelian dialectics, a logical model composed of a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, and evolved into the Marxist dialectic, which focuses largely on historical materialism, which itself is the idea that history is the result of material conditions rather than ideas. This whole concept of ruling ideas coming from the ruling class sprouts directly from that historical materialism. Here's one good quote. The ruling ideas are nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relations grasped as ideas, hence of the relations which make the one class the ruling one, therefore the ideas of its dominance. What does this mean? Essentially, Marx is saying that because the ruling class has material dominance, they will also have dominance of ideas. Another idea rooted in here is the concept of class consciousness. Class consciousness is defined as, quote, the set of beliefs a person holds regarding their social class or economic rank in society, the structure of their class, and their class interests. The upper and lower classes are different to their core, and the upper classes cement their control using any means necessary. The upper class, says Marx, while it may be composed of different people, has a definite identity and goals. The upper class also has the mental power, as well as the economic power, because they are able to put themselves into those positions through their economic strength. According to Marx's doctrine, this is also what eventually leads to class struggle and warfare. The workers will tire of being pushed around, and eventually the lower classes will seize control. Putting these two pieces together, historical materialism and class consciousness, we can understand how ruling ideas are put in place. Because the upper class has the economic power and the history, they can express their ideas as eternal laws and resist change by saying that things have always been this way. This quote from the reading sums it up. They rule also as thinkers, as producers of ideas, and regulate the production and distribution of the ideas of their age. Thus, their ideas are the ruling ideas of the epoch.
Marx and Engels suggested that the ruling class believes in the concept of the separation of the ruling class's ideas from the class itself. They state how they hold true to the belief that during the time the aristocracy was dominant, the concepts of honor, loyalty, and etc. were dominant, while during the dominance of the bourgeoisie, the concepts of freedom, equality, and etc. were dominant. By presenting these values as a common interest and as something that actually benefits a range of several different classes, the ruling class is further justifying their positions within their societies. Rather than opposing a class, the opposers would then be opposing the ideas that are representative of the society as a whole. Marx and Engels mention how the proletarians were able to progress past the proletat when the French bourgeoisie overthrew the aristocracy, but only to a certain extent. They then state how every new class, therefore, achieves domination on a broader basis than that of the class ruling previously. There are three attempts in which Marx and Engels provide to prove the hegemony in the spirit in history. The first attempt being the separation of the ruling class's ideas from the ruling class itself. The second attempt is to give these ideas mystical connections in order to be perceived as self-determined. The third attempt was being to personify these ideas into the thinkers, the philosophers, and the ideologists. These illusions of society are all validated through the separation of ideas from the ruling class.
Subaltern classes result from the historical unities of the ruling classes, which is realized and acknowledged by the given state. It is essentially the history of states and group of states. This unity is not simply judicial or political, but it is rather fundamental historical unity, which results from the organic relations between the state or political society and civil society. Subaltern classes are not unified nor can unite until they become a state themselves. The history behind this is intertwined with civil society and thereby with the history of states and group of states. There are 6 main factors that are necessary to study when observing a subaltern class, and they are as follows. Number 1 and 2, the objective formations of the subaltern social groups, and their origins in pre-existing social groups and certain ideological aims that they can serve for a time. Number 3, the birth of a new dominant group that are intended to conserve the ascent of the subaltern groups and maintain control over them. Number 4, the formations which the subaltern group produces in order to process claims of a limited and partial character. Number 5 and 6, the new formation which assert the autonomy of the subaltern groups but stay within old frameworks, and essentially frameworks which assert the overall integral autonomy. The methodological criterion of subaltern groups is based on the supremacy of how a social group manifests itself in 2 ways: as dominant and as an intellectual moral leadership. When a social group dominates the antagonistic groups, it tends to liquidate and must be able to lead kindred and allied groups while exercising acts of leadership before it is able to win overall government power. Becoming dominant, exercising power, and leading well is the 3 core principles in the conditions for winning of such power.
Hey there, my name is Maddie. I am coming to you from Bellingham, Washington. It's a beautiful day today. I don't know if you can kind of see the water. Pretty nice view. Yeah, it's a beautiful day, and I will be talking to you about the concept of ideology. So ideology was an aspect of sensationalism that can be associated with 18th century materialism. The official definition of ideology is the body of ideas reflecting the social need and aspirations of the individual, group, class, or culture. Ideology has had various different meanings and definitions over time, such as the science of ideas, the analysis of ideas, and investigation of the origin of ideas. All of these different meanings eventually became one that we know today, and that is the system of ideas. And according to our author Gramsci, the process in which ideology went from those previous definitions that I just stated to the one we know today, system of ideas, that needs to be studied historically. The author Gramsci highlights the negative connotations that ideology received from Marxist theorists. He chooses to focus on Marx and Marxist theorists a few times in this reading, which I think is interesting, and he traces the origins of their errors to the following 3 points. The idea that structure changes ideology, not vice versa. A given political solution is ideological, along with stupid and useless, because it fails to change structure, although it claims that it can do so. And ideologies are just for appearances, deeming them useless and stupid, pretty much. So those are the 3 origins of the Marxist theorist errors that our author highlighted. He goes on to mention Marx again, and he talks about how Marx discussed the solidarity of popular beliefs as a necessary element. He felt that popular conviction often had the same energy as material force, and I just thought it was interesting that our author Gramsci highlighted that, because it seems that he agrees with it. So with that, I hope you guys have a great day, and I will pass it on to Nikita.
According to Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, the dominant class is just some ways a material organization that maintains, develops, and defends their ideological front. The most important part in maintaining this front happens to be the press, such as political newspapers, periodicals of every kind, from scientific to literary to popular. However, even though the press is the most widespread and important aspect of maintaining this front for the dominant class, it isn't the only one. Anything that can have an influence on the general public or can be used. For example, libraries, schools, associations, and even architecture and street names. Marx and Engels used the example of the church and how it would be impossible to explain or to even understand the position retained by the church in society if we were not made aware of their constant efforts to maintain and develop this position as a dominant class. Marx and Engels then bring up the question regarding what resources are there for the innovative class against the complex dominant class. They believe the answer to this question is the spirit of secession. They describe secession to be, as quoted, the progressive acquisition of the consciousness of its own historical personality. In other words, Marx and Engels believe that in order to combat the dominant class, the innovative class must have the knowledge and be aware of the constant historical personality of its own class and must spread themselves into classes that are their allies. And doing this requires knowledge and a complex ideological labor.
Hey there, it's Maddie again. For our activity, we are going to be facilitating a discussion. We have a couple questions with follow-up questions for you all to answer and then converse about. So our first question is, what is an example of a ruling idea in your life, and how does it affect your life? Does it affect your life positively or negatively? Our second question is, do you agree or disagree with any of the previous definitions or current definitions of ideology? If you do or don't, that's great. But is there a definition of your own that you think would be better? So go ahead and leave your initial comment below, and then we encourage you to comment on other people's posts so we can kind of start a dialogue and start a conversation. Thanks for watching our video, and hope you have a great day.